Good evening. This is live from Londinium. I'm Gaius. Germanicus is here. We're observing the Thames. It's unusually grim tonight. The wind's up. And the boatmen who cross the Thames routinely are sitting on their hands tonight. It's too rough out there. You'd have to really be running from someone with a bigger sword than you've got to risk the Thames tonight. So we're a little chilly here. We've asked the Centurions to turn the fire up, and we have a lot to do. We're not going to be able to accomplish it all tonight. It's 28 points. We have our limits. However, we're going to do what we can with 28-point plan to end the Ukrainian disruption. The Kremlin is prevailing. The Kyiv is disappearing. The emperor in Washington has given his ruling. It must happen. Europe, our allies, are going along saying, well, adjust here, adjust there, we'll go along with it. But there's more than just success. There's the deep irony of how things are done in the 20th century and now the 21st. Germanicus, 28 points. Let me see. That's 2 times 14, I believe. My math isn't what it could be.
Well, Woodrow Wilson set a precedent that all peace plans have to be multiples of 7. So Here we are with it's twice as long as Wilson's 14 points.
The heart of it for my reading is the territories. Generations will come and go as they have before. Ukraine's been at odds with Moscow for 1,000 years. It will continue. This is another chapter in the contest. This time, however, the territory being ceded is Donbass, roughly speaking. A piece of this, a piece of that. There will be elections. Russia will win the elections. And everything will turn out all right in the end. And it'll be another episode of violence coming to no conclusion. They will be at it again. However, the participation of the emperor is what we care about, because our emperor here, Domitian, seems incapable of rendering a success along the Dacian frontier, along the Danube, and has irritated the Senate to the point that they will soon do away with him. And then we'll have the Barrack Room emperors, who are very successful, not Nerva, but Hadrian and Trajan. And we'll have a good century. So let's look at the 14 points from Woodrow Wilson's time and the 28 points from Donald Trump's time. I'm going to concentrate again on the territory, because things like open diplomacy, who wants to accept that?
It was open covenants openly arrived at.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. The idea that they celebrated Wilson when he arrived, I think it was Le Havre, on the cruise ship that he traveled across. They celebrated him as if he was Jesus's younger brother. And they accepted everything he had to say. I picture now at the it was not a chateau, it was a townhouse in Paris they gave Wilson. And there he is on the floor with Clemenceau and, let's see, I think that was just the two of them poring over a map, drawing lines of who's going to get what. Lloyd George might have been there. I don't remember the detail, but it was clearly Clemenceau and Wilson. They had no idea what they were doing. They had experts feeding them. Well, I can imagine the same thing. Steve Witkoff is a real estate developer. He's not a man who we hold responsible for what went wrong at Versailles. So let's go to what I find, and then we'll hear your entertainment. Evacuation of all Central Powers from Russia and Belgium. Sure, no problem. We'll just rearm and take all of it. Fine. Return of Alsace-Lorraine. Remember that was important in the 20th century? France gets Alsace-Lorraine back. The Tiger Clemenceau wins. Thumbs up. And readjustment of Italian borders. And again, it's a laugh riot. They thought this was serious. And then source sovereignty for Turkish partners of the Ottoman Empire. the Ottoman Empire. They tore it apart, and we're still dealing with the disaster. I think we can all send the IOU to Clemenceau, Wilson, and Talleyrand, and Lloyd George.
Yeah, the Turks are still fighting for Kurdistan, which they want back, and parts of Syria, which they've actually occupied. So it still continues.
It's 100. What is it? 111 years.
Yeah.
The Ottoman Empire is still nonsensically violent. All right. So your measure of the 28. Now that we have 100 years or more of opinion of the Versailles Treaty, which was meaningless at the time, but was regarded as a success. And then the rest of the century was the tragedy of tearing it up and violating everything in it. Your measure of the 28 points before we start violating it.
Well, I think Wilson would have been well advised to have included a real estate developer rather than getting all these State Department teams that drew all sorts of maps, trying their damnedest to be fair, and then all that being swept away because of the venal needs of the Italians and others, and the desire to punish belligerents like Germany and Hungary and Austria. So there we go. I mean, it was the most unfair drawing of lines ever, and it just, as you said, set up more conflict. This is the 28 points, that is. The 28 points, in contrast, are very pragmatic. And unlike other so-called plans, which focused on a ceasefire and nothing else, this actually deals with the realities on the ground. And the realities on the ground are really dependent on including the most ardent Russian nationalists in Ukraine who are concentrated in Donbass, and making sure that they are included with Russia. And over time, in the future, I think Ukraine will thank whoever created this cartographic solution, because the last thing Ukraine should want is ardent Russian nationalists within its borders. So in a way, it's a kind of a solution that actually assists both sides. And it meets Russia's bottom line in every regard but one. So, for example, it says all Nazi ideology and activities must be rejected and prohibited. All discriminatory measures guarantee the rights of Ukrainian and Russian media. And in a nice twist, since Ukraine desperately wants to join the EU, it said Ukraine will adopt EU rules on religious tolerance and the protection of linguistic minorities, which, of course, they, meaning Ukraine, have been abusing ever since the Maidan coup. And so it's going to be hard for Ukraine to say, oh, we want to continue to persecute Russians, when in fact they also want to join the EU, which disallows such discrimination. But that's a rabbit hole to go down. The fact is that it pretty much squares everything. The division, the European counter, the so-called 24 points proposal, included I don't know which number it was, but it wanted to turn the Zaporizhian nuclear power plant over to Ukraine, which is a no-go for Russia. But the 28-point proposal splits it 50-50 in terms of the apportioning of power generation by the nuclear plant. It's not a terrible outcome, I think. And, we talk a lot about Ukraine, which really was, before the creation of any kind of Ukrainian state, considered a borderland. And the area of the Zaporizhian Cossacks and other sort of proto-Ukrainians was north of the territories now occupied by Russia. And the territories now occupied by Russia, Donbass is all Russian in its sympathies. Many of the people there were put there by Stalin. And the areas in Zaporizhia and Kherson and, of course, Crimea, those were never part of any kind of Ukrainian nation. I mean, they were part of the Khanate of the Crimea, which extended all the way up to about where Russian forces are in Kherson and Zaporizhia. So it doesn't do any disfiguring of historical antecedents either. And in many ways, by guaranteeing reconstruction and splitting the reconstruction costs between Russia and Europe, it creates a kind of even-handedness there that is also not bad. And it doesn't expropriate all the Russian money that has been frozen. It's pretty even-handed and balanced. The one area that I think Russia will have difficulty with is allowing Ukraine a 600,000 man army, which is sizable. I mean, it's bigger than the Ukrainian active army going into the war in 2022. But it's very hard to enforce restrictions on military capability. The Allies weren't able to really ever do that with Germany. They limited the German army to 7 divisions and 150,000 men, but the reality was circumvented rather cleverly by the Germans. And it ultimately, rearmament happened when the Germans finally, with Hitler's permission, decided to go full bore, and then they rearmed heavily. So 600,000 is not as bad as it looks on paper, in large part because Ukraine has been so depopulated at this point, and it has lost so many men that it will be a generation before it can really grow its army. So it might have 600,000 men on paper, but they'll all be old reservists, basically. The active force will be probably very small. One thing, on the other hand, that is not covered, and that's unfortunate in this document, is the kind of weapons that Ukraine can be supplied with by its friends, the US and NATO. And I don't think Russians want to let that go, because if the US and Europe can start sending long-range missiles into Ukraine, well, that will create problems for a lasting agreement. So the ultimate agreement that's arrived at will have to deal with that issue. And finally here, Ukraine is formally disallowed from joining NATO. NATO must agree to that. And that solves that problem insofar as Russia's concerned. And also, I think one of the best parts of the agreement, from the standpoint of getting Russian buy-in, is that although it does not fully satisfy all of Russia's objectives, it does offer Russia reintegration into the world order and to be a member of the G8 again. And that's a big deal for Russia. Russia's been surviving economically and actually growing, but that's in large part due to the fact that it's an immobilized or semi-mobilized war economy. And when the war is over, Russia will need to be open to investment, et cetera, et cetera. And this provides that. So it helps to work toward reintegrating Russia, not just in the world order, but also, as stated in the proposal, actually spelling out U.S.-Russian cooperative endeavors economically, which would be, joint ventures and the like. And that's very good, because that would that would create a more normal situation in world affairs, and it would help to prevent sliding back into some kind of neo-Cold War. And this has been the great failing of all the pro Ukrainian war tub thumpers, is they were literally pushing and continue to push for a forever war, which will turn into a long Cold War. And in that Cold War, the chief losers will be the European members of the EU. And they're, as was once said, cutting off their nose to spite their face. So this agreement really is positive, not simply in that it satisfies most of Russia's titular objectives in the war, and also allows for Ukraine to survive as a sovereign nation, losing only those areas that didn't want to be a part of it. It's not bad.
Let's play a game. You remind me. I have a war game for you when we come back. It's a paranoid game. It's deeply, deeply, deeply Polish. You'll enjoy it. It's called When Russia Wins. Germanicus and I are in Londinium. This is live. We're dealing with the 28 points that were given. It may be 24. By tomorrow morning, it might be 19. We don't know. However, the intention here is to end the immediate crisis. What comes next is, depending upon what capital you're sitting in, Paris or Warsaw or London, is a trigger for the Cold War II, a rearmament of Europe, a building of a collective force, the end of NATO, Russia giving an endorsement to go farther. All of that in a war game when we come back. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. We're in Londinium with our centurions who are nodding away because they know the war's not over. I'm Gaius, and this is the Chronicles of Londinium. We don't know the future, but we can certainly guess it won't be peace. I'm John Batchelor. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I'm Gaius. Germanicus is here. Our centurions, retired, are here as well, enjoying their second or third cup of wine. I've not been counting. It's a cold evening along the Thames. I told you the boatmen are sitting on their hands. It's too cold to go out there. We're looking at the 28 points delivered in these last days by the Emperor's counselors. And we're reflecting on the 14 points Woodrow Wilson delivered in 1919 that led to the catastrophe of the Second War and the Cold War and the tearing up of the map in Europe, and now the tearing up of the map in Mesopotamia. So we can only guess how the map will be torn up from these 28 points. However, I come to sometimes paranoids have enemies. So when I say it's a paranoid NATO dream, I don't mean to disrespect it. It's a book. It can be titled When Russia Wins or If Russia Wins. It's a bestseller in Europe right now. It's being translated into many languages. You can go on and see it. Written by an Italian with national security background. And the scenario I'm going to give to Germanicus, he's played plenty of tabletop games. Used to be called war games. You get 3 moves, and there's a tendency to go nuke. But this time we're not going to worry about that, because the object of the game for Russia is to destroy NATO. The object of the game for NATO is to survive. Here it goes. It's 2028. Ukraine is at a stand down, ceasefire. The 28-point plan suits where Ukraine is. That's not the issue. Suddenly, over the weekend, Russian forces show up in Narva, Estonia, a completely Russian-speaking city. And they also take an island in the middle of the river. Remember, Estonia is about 100 miles from Petersburg. It's right on top of Russia. But the Russians just sit there. They don't do anything, just like they did with Crimea in 2014. They just sit there. And NATO starts ringing each other's phones. Is this Article 5? One of us has been attacked. He's being occupied. Everybody else goes, yeah, but they're not moving. What's the problem here? It's a Russian-speaking town. They are entirely part of the Russian media empire. It's Estonia. The Estonians are then pressed hard, and they don't invoke Article 5 either. So if it's not invoked, what do? Suddenly, a man who's very important to the German weapons industry, the rearmament of Germany, which is going on right now. You can see the headlines about the Bundestag did not vote for a draft, but they voted for all 18-year-olds to register for the draft. Germany's rearming now. That's the plan. A German manufacturer dies in a car crash that looks very suspicious. And there are other gray zone activities, sometimes called hybrid warfare, across the European map. They everybody keeps interpreting these things as it's just terrorism or it's just pranks. Some people interpret it otherwise. And we get to a point now where Washington says it's none of our affair, washes its hands and backs off. You guys handle it. It's your problem. Russia then has effectively ended NATO. NATO's done. There's no Article 5. There's no unanimity. Estonia is told to lump it. Next after that is the next Russian-speaking territory on the frontier. Remember, near Broad was Russian territory for several hundred years, and the Cold War gave it up without any transition moment. I know, having traveled to Azerbaijan many times over these last years, everybody over 40 is a Russian speaker. You can go almost anywhere in the Central Asian republics and find Russia dominating the leadership because they all speak the language. They were trained at Moscow University. They were Soviets. Only the young people are not. There you have it, Germanicus. That's the war game. Credible to you, and what do you do? What do you do if you're a NATO nation and we haven't invoked Article 5 and the Russians are just sitting there?
Well, you call their bluff, and you call their bluff by sending in a force. And since this is several years in the future, this feisty and accelerating German rearmament should be able to deploy some forces somewhere. If they're not, then it'll be shown to be a sham.
You anticipated perfectly. I remember there's a twist here. The Bundestag meets and does not give permission for the Americans to cross German territory. That's what happened.
Yeah, but it need not be German. It could be actually a German-Polish force, since they train together. Yes. And you put a legion, whatever the legion is, somewhere between a brigade and a division, right in front of the Russians, and you just sit there like they are.
Okay, I like it, but it's not an end game. I agree with what you're saying. You counter their move, but NATO is the question. Have they destroyed NATO?
NATO will remain a titular organization no matter what the Russians do. Now, whether or not it's an effective alliance depends on how you judge its performance. In the last 25 years, its performance has been dismal. At least in the 1990s, it was able to jointly wage war on Serbia, occupy parts of the former Yugoslavia and stay there. So it was acting like an alliance in a way, although its moves were, over Kosovo, for example.
Do you think NATO's already
debatable? But the thing is, after the 9/11 war, began, and eventually NATO agreed to send forces to Afghanistan, and that is amazing. They did not perform well there, and NATO was actually weakened by this coerced deployment because the U.S. put pressure on NATO to expand its regional scope to Afghanistan. That's just unbelievable. So NATO is not very effective. And then when you take this war into account, NATO has managed to ruin Ukraine.
So
that's the outcome. But wait, they also trained.
Wait, I want to understand.
Army, and they trained them for a mission that no longer is relevant.
Yes,
and they helped Ukraine be defeated in the Zaporizhian offensive of 2023. So it's not a very effective alliance, and it's kind of a laughingstock. And if you look at the German military over the last 4 or 5 years, it is a laughingstock. And I don't know how Germany is going to rearm in even 10 years, let alone 3 or 4. And they're spending money, but the money isn't panning out, because all of the European defense industries and American defense industries, more important, are following in the wake of a deindustrializing, financialized economy, which is what the West is at this point. The only nations that can build warships are Japan and Korea, because they have robust shipbuilding industries. And even they have, I mean, the Korean army may be all right. The Japanese, I have my doubts. So, we're living in a dream world where we equate military power with expenditure, whereas the two are not really directly related, as we've seen by Russian performance industrially during this war. So the most that NATO can do is to do a check, as in chess. It won't be a checkmate. It won't be an end game. It'll just be ongoing. And the problem with what Russia's doing is NATO could also respond, or if the U.S. wished to, by abrogating many of the terms of this potential peace agreement in the offing, the 28-point plan, and cut Russia off again and reimpose sanctions. And that would be tremendously damaging to Russia. Not that they couldn't handle it, but it would put a lot of pressure on again. And I don't think Russia wants to do that. So I'm not saying that this isn't a credible war game, but it is far-fetched. And in the situation you've outlined, the best counter move is one that throws it back at the Russians and say, okay, now it's your move. We're 500 yards, meters, what the hell, away from you, on the at Narva. Are you going to make this a serious thing or not? So it's I just don't think that NATO would want to risk a war, but more importantly, I don't think Russia, after finally gaining this peace agreement and being able to reconnect with the world and losing approximately 3 times the number of men that we did in Vietnam, I just can't imagine them wanting to throw it away with a needless confrontation. Unless, of course, it was precipitated, which is to say provoked, by the Estonians, because the Estonians and Latvians are notorious in their discrimination against Russians. You have to pass a test in the national language, and if you don't, and most Russians really can't, especially the older Russians, then they get thrown out of the country. This sort of thing is potentially explosive. But I think we're a long way from the kind of attacks that Russia was mounting, like the denial of service attacks, which was a famous kind of hybrid warfare exercise in 2008. So, I mean, it's always good to play these tabletop games, but
I want to understand. I'm not pushing back. I want to understand. In this scenario, we just had a hybrid attack So according to Donald Tusk in Poland.
Yes.
All right. So I want to understand. In 2028, with the capture of Nerva, and Estonia doesn't invoke Article 5, does NATO exist? Is NATO already out of existence now, so we don't have to wait to I just want to clarify what you're saying.
NATO only existed. Let me be, plain about this. NATO only really existed in the context of going to war with the Soviet Union, which would be nuclear. So,
right. Means
I guess you brought me up to a point where I can see this more clearly now, and that is that NATO never implemented policies or exercised itself on lesser contingencies, with the one exception of the post Yugoslavia breakup, Kosovo, etc. And that was relatively straightforward because it was in the NATO operating area, and it didn't involve Russia, of great power. But the idea of NATO being able to effectively have a set of protocols that allow it to respond to great power provocations that don't necessarily require a nuclear response, NATO is really not, and I would argue has never been prepared for that.
So NATO doesn't exist now or wouldn't exist in 28?
NATO is a scenario limited alliance. It can do certain things, and it's not able to do a full range of things. And since it operates as an alliance only in terms of peacetime exercises or in terms of defense or defense industry cooperation, or it has many meetings in Brussels, it's not an alliance that has developed the ability to respond to the kinds of provocations that exist today. It's designed for one kind of provocation, one kind of face-off with a great power, but no others. And so I find NATO kind of an empty shell now. It's a consultative body, and it has militaries, but those militaries are minuscule and not capable of serious operations, and that includes all the nations in NATO. Just to give you one example, maybe two, the French and the British each in the last couple of years decided to have a major show of force exercise to show that they were still to be taken seriously, a force to be reckoned with, as it were. They were going to move division-sized units to Romania. And they found they couldn't do that. They could not pull that off. They did not have the logistics, capability, and planning to make that happen. So I don't see NATO as a real alliance. What I see is security literally guaranteed by Russian forbearance. Russia doesn't want to invade NATO or fight it. And what it does want, it may soon achieve, but it is not in NATO. It's Ukraine. And so NATO's been playing a game for many, many years, ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. NATO was a real military capability to be reckoned with, and it was all ready to go toe-to-toe with the Ruskies. But those are times long ago in a galaxy far away.
So you're ruling out Russia playing the ethnic language card?
I'm not ruling it out. I don't think it will come into play unless the discrimination against Russians living in the Baltics ticks upward. And there are a lot of hotheads in Lithuania and Latvia.
All right.
And
What about Kazakhstan?
Kazakhstan. Yeah.
Kazakhstan has a great elite community of Russian speakers.
Oh, it does. It does. And at one point, and this may no longer be the case, it was something like 20% of the population. There was a significant percentage even in places like Uzbekistan. But Kazakhstan is in between China and Russia.
Right.
And both China and Russia have big plans for Kazakhstan, and Kazakhstan has big plans for itself. So they don't want to screw up a good thing that they actually have a good deal right now as a linchpin of Eurasia. So,
I just want to make sure I understand right now. Your opinion is that NATO is a talk fest.
yeah, you could see that as far back as 2008.
I accept that, but
war
NATO,
in Georgia. Yeah.
so Russia's already achieved its ambition.
Oh, yeah, and it doesn't have to. The worst thing Russia could do right now is to shame and humiliate NATO, and that is one of the reasons I think that Mr. Putin has not really unleashed Russia, because the result of that, you don't corner an animal because it'll
Okay.
go crazy. So it's not a Sturm im Wasserglas, but it is close to one.
I agree with your position. It's not in the papers.
No. Well, everyone has to maintain a pretense. This is very important right now, and you see this in the rhetoric that heated up recently between Japan and China, with threats of cutting off heads and the like. The rhetoric is in inverse and direct proportion to the seriousness of the situation. The more heated the rhetoric, the easier you can rest it.
All right. Final question: does Ukraine accept your verdict
about NATO?
Yeah.
Well, I think at this point they've made their peace internally with the fact that they won't be part of NATO, and it would be just an awful headache if they tried again. That's not. But the fact that Russia accepts EU membership is sufficient for Ukraine, because the thing Ukraine needs the most right now, and will need for the next 50 years, is to have some connection economically with a developed place that will invest in it.
Germanicus, Ukraine is going to loot. That's what they're going to do. They were the most corrupt country in Europe before the war. They're going to loot the treasury. There's not going to be a dime left in the treasury room. They're all spreading out now. They're nothing but oligarchs. And they've got their hand in the pocket of the EU, and they're going to loot it. I mean, Russia knows that. So does Ukraine.
Yeah. So that's a big win for Russia. So the best outcome for Russia would be to graciously accept all of the terms that benefit them territorially and in terms of their security needs, but also to encourage Ukraine to get closer to the EU. And this is probably the poison pill in the whole 28-point proposal, in which the U.S. is offering Europe to put up $100 billion. It's going to be Europe's economic health is at risk here, and the Ukraine war is the worst thing that's probably happened to Europe since 1945.
What do you tell the Baltics? Relax or buy weapons?
It won't do any good anyway, because the fertility rate of these countries is so low that they're likely to disappear. I mean, the fertility is the lowest in Europe, and
so the answer is there's nothing we can do for them.
Well, there's nothing we can do for them except to urge them not to do stupid things. I mean, they have they hate Russians, and they have every reason to, given what happened with Stalin and World War II. But they also were big collaborators. I mean, they wholeheartedly joined the cause of what we should call the Nazi EU, the European project. So in World War II.
Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. All they have to do is turn around and they look at Kaliningrad, and that's their future. Is that correct?
No, I think their future's going to be fine. It's just going to be very, very small and diminishing. These are very tiny countries. They're the equivalent of,
Yes.
of states like Wyoming, for example.
So as far as they're concerned, we don't know where they're going, but they're not going to be major concerns here. Can they stand down and accept whatever happens?
Well, they're going to keep pretending. I mean, they all have
right.
volunteer regiments of, young people being trained in weapons, and they can do that. I mean, Latvia is reclaiming its swamps and marshes so that the Russians can advance easily. I mean, that's literally where they're going to be. I mean, they'll be fine. They don't threaten Russia, and Russia doesn't really want them.
Yes, it does.
Well, here's what Russia wants. It wants its Russians in those Baltic states to be protected, but it also does want more access to the Baltic. And one of the stupider things that NATO's doing once Sweden and Finland joined is to start threatening Russia's access to the Baltic and the larger world, the Atlantic world, by threatening to do all sorts of interruptions of Russian merchant traffic, and that is irksome to the Russians. And the real reason Stalin went into the Baltics in 1940 was he wanted bases like Revel and Riga, so that Russia could have direct access and not be bottled up in the Gulf of Finland.
The book is either When Russia Wins or If Russia Wins. It's in translation. I've ordered it, so we'll see what other twists come in the hybrid warfare part. It's a paranoid vision, as Germanicus explicates. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. When we come back, we're going to pay tribute to a very intellectual king, probably the smartest king Britain ever had, England ever had, James I, James VI of Scotland, James I of England. And you didn't know it because we don't know it until now, having been educated in the 20th century. The true founding father is James I. This is Friends of History Debating Society. I'm John Batchelor. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I'm Gaius. Germanicus is here. And we're in Londinium. We're going to the theater. There's going to be a mock battle tonight. The Centurions have promised us a surprise. Wooden swords, a lot of recruits running around, a lot of teenagers pretending to be Centurions. The retired Centurions here have great fun teaching their skills to the young men, the boys, who then want to join a legion. It's recruiting. It's smart. And their children all want to join as well, because when your father's a retired centurion, you have weight in the army. You're the son of a centurion. It matters a great deal. However, we're going to turn to something that I've just realized after having read a biography of James I called The Mirror of Great Britain by Cambridge historian Claire Jackson. In 1607 and 1608, James is just new at being the King of England. Remember, Elizabeth dies in 1603, in March of 1603. And James is her inheritor It's a little distant. He's the grandson of a sister of Henry VIII. All of Henry VIII's wives came to no heir in 1603. Elizabeth is the end of the line. Elizabeth, having never met James, the sixth of Scotland, he was made the King of Scotland when he was, I think, 13 months old. His mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, couldn't have the crown, and she either had her husband murdered or someone murdered him for her. And so she was obliged to depose, that means give up her claim on the title, and they gave it to the 13-month-old who survived, James I. Very intellectual young king, many languages, very well read, wrote poetry, went to the theater. Shakespeare wrote for him, for heaven's sakes. There's a very good case at Macbeth, Lear, and Antony and Cleopatra are all written for the king to reflect the gunpowder plot of 1605. Remember the 5th of November. But I'm going to get to the part that is most impressive to me, is that my education said the founding fathers were in the 18th century. I have reason to doubt it after reading a biography of James I. 1607, the Spanish and the Portuguese have cut up the New World, thanks to the Pope. The Portuguese get everything east of, Spanish get everything west of. They mean to claim everything from the Arctic Circle to the, well, they don't even know there is an Arctic Circle. From the top of North America to the bottom. They're guessing because the maps are terrible, but that's what they claim. And it's the Spanish Empire. It's the Holy Roman Empire. It's very powerful. Remember the Armada? It's theirs. In addition, there's no one interested in giving anything to this sort of wormy little country at the edge of Europe called England. Well, here comes James I. They crown him. They say he's James I. He's got Henry, an heir, who's heir apparent. Henry dies young at 18, but nobody knows that yet. He's got Elizabeth, whom he's going to marry to the Palatinate in Europe, the Protestant lords that turn into the 30 Years' War. And he's got Charles, the younger one. Charles will become king and have his head cut off eventually. But that's what the Stuarts have, the first functioning family in the crown, I think, in several hundred years. James accepts the Spanish ambassador. And the Spanish ambassador said, Your Majesty, perhaps you don't know that there are these invasions in our territory in this part of the New World. And he points to a map, and he's vaguely pointing to the Chesapeake Bay. And the king says, I don't know anything about it. It's private business. None of my affair. It's not the crown. We're not there. Oh, yes, these fellows, they came to me. They wanted a charter. They paid me. They say they're going to pay in tobacco. I think smoking's a bad habit. I discourage it in my people. What else could I do for you? That's it. Germanicus don't you love how simple it is? If he said, oh, forgive me, ambassador, tell the emperor I didn't know about this. I'll enforce it. There will be no more trouble in Chesapeake Bay. That's the end of America, Michael. That's it. Done.
Well, I mean, just to give this some strategic context, his response was opaquely professional. I mean, he did not provoke, he did not promise, and he did not pander. Instead, he basically said, oh, unlike my predecessor, Elizabeth, who fought Spain for 20 years, and that war only came to an end right before James's accession, he had something of a threat there on Spain, and Spain had its own quite real concerns about the English in the New World, because after all, during that long war, all sorts of places like Nombre de Dios and a lot of places on the so-called Spanish Main had been pillaged. And of course, the great assault on Lisbon, Cadiz, towns in Spain, still lingered strongly in Spanish memory. So I don't think there was any real desire by either side to get serious here. But the Spanish would come to rue the outcome, namely the colonization of the eastern seaboard of North America, because those colonies were constantly attacking either the French to the north or the Spanish in the Floridas, plural. And that would get very serious by the 18th century, and of course led to a series of wars between Spain and Britain, in which Spain actually held its own very well. But the truth is that James the First was a cagey guy, and he, by creating the divine right of kings, he essentially set up the disaster that befell his son.
Yes, in 1618, James has dinner with a man named Yardley, Yeardley, an alternative spelling of Yardley, who is knowledgeable of the Virginia colony, the Jamestown colony. Jamestown has failed, but there are about 10,000 people who have now moved into the area. About 2,000 are still alive. The death rate is horrendous. Plus, the Indians are difficult, the natives. But they have dinner together, and James says, what is it that you need? Well, Your Majesty, we're struggling along. We need you to accept tobacco because we can pay in tobacco. And the king he's an anti-smoker fanatic, Germanicus. I mean, just what do you do with this? It's the 17th century. You want to say, are you kidding? You know how much money there is in that? Have you ever heard of sugar? We got that too. Okay. So he says, well, do you need anything from me? And Yardley goes, yes, Your Majesty, we need permission. We need everybody to know that there's work for them. We need as many of your parishioners, your congregation as possible. And the king says, okay, fine. That's a good idea. I like having my realm extend into the New World. And that's 1618. What is that? A little more than 400 years ago. And so I'm not saying he went out of his way. He didn't pay for things. He didn't have much money. Parliament wouldn't give him money. He was always struggling to come up with a way of getting revenue, raise taxes, or give me some. He would have enjoyed tariffs. They called it.
He had plenty of money, but he lavished money on his retainers who fawned on him, especially the pretty boys, and he was a real spendthrift on all the wrong places.
And he gave permission to the Virginia colony. He gave a charter that said you can develop anything from Philadelphia to Newfoundland. He gave that charter out. He sold it. I don't have a paragraph 2 here. Paragraph 1 is that's the founding father right there. Everything that happens in the 18th century doesn't happen except for him giving permission to the colonists who come wave after wave for the next 150 years.
Well, the light management, as it were, of the colonies really is what led to a rebellion against Britain ultimately, because by 1700, all of the colonies were essentially self-governing at that point. And they had royal governors, but I mean, the legislatures, the assemblies were independent. And in many ways, the English Civil War helped to, by establishing the dominance of Parliament over the monarchy, that kind of relationship extended ipso facto to the colonies. So the colonies, all 13 of them, had little miniature mirrors of what had happened to Britain during the Civil War. And so Americans grew up in the 18th century believing in the supremacy of their assemblies and not of obviously the king or even Parliament, because the thinking was, well, Parliament doesn't include us, British citizens, as part of their deliberation, and we have, as a kind of mirror of British society, we have our little kings, the royal governors, but they are subservient in some higher sense to the deliberations of the assemblies. So it was all figured.
I don't want to press this too far. I just find it entertaining as heck that maybe James I's picture should be on the $100 bill. Maybe.
He helped. He is an unappreciated king who's typically in the recent past, the last 50, 100 years or more, is seen as the guy who patronized Shakespeare to some extent, or Shakespeare wrote while he was king. And then he's seen as the father of Charles I, the walking disaster. But the truth of the matter is that you brought out here is that he essentially, although he didn't realize this, obviously, he set the course for the development, not just of modern Britain, but of the United States as well, by essentially pursuing the doctrine of divine right and setting Britain on a course where there would be a final showdown between Parliament and the king. And of course, that was the showdown that America went through with Britain in the later 18th century. So, in a sense, he was the father of two countries.
Right. Great Britain is the mother country, and James I is the father. And George Washington would acknowledge it. So would Ben Franklin, in their way.
Yeah.
Germanicus is Michael Vlahos. Gaius is John Batchelor. We're in Londinium. We're going on to a mock battle. I'm not sure which one they're going to stage for us, Germanicus. We'll be surprised. Apparently, there's a game on tonight. We have to guess the battle they're recreating. The Centurions are leaving early. We'll be along, guys. We got to sacrifice to Augustus on our way. This is the Friends of History Debating Society, live from Londinium. I'm John Batchelor.